Speaking of clowns running for office, there was a debate the other night, which we did not cover here on our show. I know you guys live streamed it.
That was a great decision. And I cover those debates because I like seeing the foreign policy. I told you guys I'm a foreign policy nerd. Like, even though I know these people full of shit, I like to see what the establishment say about foreign policy because that shows you what the direction of the empire is going to be, right? But I'm like, this is a waste of time, and I think that's the last debate I'm going to cover if Trump not there. Because out of the 2-hour debate, they spent like 5 minutes on Ukraine, probably 10 minutes overall on foreign policy. Whenever they mentioned China, it wasn't like in terms of policy, it was just fear-mongering, so I don't even count that. But go ahead, Ken, if you want to chime in.
Well, no, that's the thing. They could not stop fear-mongering about China. It's like somebody paid. It was like there was a game, like sometimes when these movie stars go to do these interviews, they'll do like 100 interviews a day. And there was this one actor, I forget who she was, where she's like, her publicist gives her a word that she has to inject into every interview just to kind of make it fun for herself to keep it fresh. It was like someone said, okay, no matter what the question is, shit talk China, no matter what, because they could not come off it. So I'm going to play a brief summary because we did not cover it on our channel here. Here's a brief summary of the debate that the Washington Post sort of cut together. Yeah. And watch just how much time is focused on China. The goal of this montage was just to give a summary of the debate. It wasn't let's see how much they talk about China. Like someone did that when we interviewed Jordan. They said, let's cut together all the times he said Jimmy. That's not this. This was just like an objective debate recap. Look at the time spent on China.
Donald Trump hides behind the walls of his golf clubs and won't show up here to answer questions like all the rest of us are up here to answer. He put $7 trillion on the debt. He should be in this room to answer those questions.
When we have a conversation about the things that are happening on this stage, we think about the fact that Vivek just said we were all good people, and I appreciate that because last debate he said we were all bought and paid for. And I thought about that for a little while and said, I can't imagine how you could say that knowing that you were just in business with the Chinese Communist Party and the same people that funded Hunter Biden millions of dollars was a partner of yours as well. It's not nonsense.
We opened a subsidiary in China. But you know what I did that was different than every other company? We got the hell out of there. And when I started my next company, Strive,
I'm glad Vivek pulled out of his business deal in 2018 in China. That must have been about the time you decided to start voting in presidential elections. So
Donald Trump failed on this as well. He said he was going to build a wall across the whole border. He built 52 miles of wall and said Mexico would pay for it. Guess what? I think if Mexico knew that he was only going to build 52 miles, they might have paid for the 52 miles.
Vivek, if you let Putin have Ukraine, that's a green light to China to take Taiwan.
A win for Russia is a win for China.
Excuse me, if you had a chance,
I forgot you like China. Honestly, every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber for what.
All right. It's like if they were cutting together a comedy reel trying to make fun of them for mentioning China so much. It was just unbelievable how often that came up. And, this is obviously a serious thing. This is something that a lot of people mention that, a lot of Republicans are, I won't even say dovish on Ukraine, but, from a more nationalist standpoint, they are, trying to, block Ukraine funding now. The hawkishness against China is just unbelievable, and it's something definitely to be worried about. This is a Twitter thread here that I think is worth taking a look at. The Army War College thinks war with China could cause 3,600 casualties per day, and so they are considering a draft. This is the report. The Russia-Ukraine war is exposing significant vulnerabilities in the Army's strategic personnel depth and ability to withstand and replace casualties. Army theater and medical planners may anticipate a sustained rate of roughly 3,600 casualties per day, ranging from those killed in action to those wounded in action or suffering disease or other non-battle injuries. So a casualty in this case doesn't necessarily mean a death, but it means 3,600 people taken off the battlefield in some way, shape, or form in a potential clash with China. The thread goes on, 1 decade's worth of casualties in 1 week. This is the other thing that people don't understand about Ukraine. The U.S. lost about 5,000 troops in Iraq over the course of that entire war. The Ukrainians in Bakhmut alone, in just over a year, lost 75,000. So the death count here is just absolutely obscene and tragic in a way that a lot of people don't care to wrap their heads around. And a lot of the sociopaths on both the Republican and the Democratic side will say, hey, look, this is a great deal for us. We're not losing any people. Well, you know who are losing a lot of people? Ukraine, who we supposedly care so much about, right?
You had U.S. government officials even criticize Ukraine for being too casualty averse. So despite Ukraine saying record numbers of deaths, the United States said, why aren't you sending more people to die on behalf of the military-industrial complex? Because that's what it is. You even have military-industrial complex officials admit that Ukraine is a great opportunity for them to test weapons. It's almost like a playground and an opportunity to learn more strategies and test their technology. But go ahead, Kian. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Yeah, feel free to chime in whenever you want, obviously. For context, the U.S. sustained about 50,000 casualties in 2 decades of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. Once again, casualties in this case, he's not referring to deaths, but in all the ways that he mentioned before, injuries, illnesses, things like that. In large-scale combat operations, the U.S. could experience that same number of casualties in 2 weeks. Others are making similar proposals due to military recruiting shortfall. So here's military.com writing, we should have our military recruiters sign up new troops for 11 months out of the year and then have our selective service draft the delta between military's needs and the total number recruited. In other words, have a volunteer force and then have a draft make up the difference. Hat tip to Malcolm Kayuni, whose compact article brought the Army War College proposal to broader attention. That article's paywalled, so I couldn't access that. But high casualties, not high tech, from unheard.com. If the United States wants to be ready for a large-scale conventional war, for example, a direct intervention to defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion, then the report argues the implication is clear that the 1970s concept of an all-volunteer force has outlived its shelf life and does not align with the current operating environment. More large-scale combat operations, troop requirements may well require a reconceptualization of the 70s and 80s volunteer force and move toward partial conscription. And so there you have that. I thought that was worth reading, especially in context of the Republican debate where they just could not shut up about China, no matter what the question was. What's your policy on the southern border? Well, the Chinese are, running fentanyl through the southern border. What's your policy on education and parents' choice? Well, parents should, have control over what their kids see and hear, and we should ban TikTok because the Chinese are fucking us with TikTok. Like, every question, no matter what it was, seemed to come back to China.
Yeah, and I would not hold it past the establishment from putting the draft back, right? But I don't think they will. This is my guess. My guess is they won't because they learned their mistake from the Vietnam War and the early neocon adventures of the United States. One of the reasons why the United States is successful at waging war is because the American people are not as invested anymore in it. And they learned it's actually a good idea to not have people nervous and sweating over a draft when they have people loved ones sent over to a war. Because once people loved ones are sent to war, once there's a possibility that you can get sent to a war, you may pay attention more. Then people will be like, why are we going to war with China if there's a threat of that? So I won't put it past them. They're evil enough to even float the idea that why it's worth talking about. But I think it would be a giant misstep if they do. I almost want it to happen because if it happens, general strike is happening real quick. Like, especially this new generation, the people that actually will be drafting, they're not going to engage and they're not going to willingly go along with U.S. imperialism the same way Americans would in the 60s and 70s. In the 60s and 70s, they were way more obedient. And even then, that caused the ruckus. What do you think that will happen if they start a draft now? I dare you. There would be way more awareness about the military-industrial complex, way more awareness about war. See, I cover it all the time. But that would be the main thing a lot of Americans will focus on, just like the 60s and 70s, if they instituted the draft. So if they do, that would be a giant mistake. Now, regarding the U.S. war hawkishness over China, I'm glad he brought up the potential casualties because I want to break some of the people who've been brainwashed by American propaganda. We would lose that war, fam. And when I say that, I'm using a very general term because when I say lose, I mean everyone loses. The global working class would be absolutely devastated. But the American military, especially the Navy, is not great. Like what war have we won? China's Navy is larger than ours. There's a military cooperation between Russia and China now. So even with the military buildup they're attempting in Japan, they send nuclear submarines to Australia and South Korea. That is them panicking, fam. There is no scenario. They got trying to have way more people. They have actually a naval system, a great intelligent defense system, where you have military industrial complex and military officials run simulations about how a war will go. And it did not go well for the United States. Most importantly, because the United States have not won a war in the modern age. We caused massive destruction and death, which will not win a war against China. Anyway.
Well, certainly we can't. I mean, this is the thing that makes me nervous about a draft, because you're absolutely right about everything you said. And I think you're right that we just don't have the morale. Like, we don't have the faith in our institutions as a country to actually support a sort of like World War II style all hands on deck effort. However, China is not Afghanistan. China is not Iraq. We're not talking about some banana republic state that we could just knock off with 100,000 troops in a few weeks. You're talking about a major world power. You're talking about arguably the major world power now. You might need a draft in order to have a chance. And even in that case, I don't think we have a chance.
And to that point, you can tell that they want to do this, Keaton, because they're trying to condition people to accept the dream from China.
Well, yes, exactly. That's what you saw in that debate. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I covered this earlier this week. I don't know how much you've been checking this out. I'm a foreign policy nerd, so I've been watching a lot of it. Have you seen literally any China segment from Fox News? Literally any China segment from MSNBC? I've been covering these segments, but I'm gonna ramp it up. Like, I'm gonna start doing like almost at least maybe 1 or 2 every week on RBN, because it's gone bananas. And I've been watching this for years, guys. I've always been watching these segments, these foreign policy segments or whatever. It's escalated to the next level, to the point where Fox News and Morning Joe, they will bring on people, especially people who are Chinese descent, and they will say, yeah, China is preparing to launch a war in the United States. They will say stuff with no evidence. And I covered this earlier this week where they'll say this, right? Now, China and their officials, they are preparing for war. They're ramping up the military. You want to know why? Because they see the Fox debate as well. Right. They see Fox News as well. They see all these United States senators and military officials. They say, yeah, I think we're going to be in war with China in 5 years. Yeah, we think we're going to be in war with China in 5 years. Yeah, war with China is a great possibility. So what the fuck do you think China's going to do when they hear that?
Right.
They're probably going to ramp up the military. So then when they ramp up the military, after threats of the United States, after the United States armed Taiwan, after they violate their sovereignty, and then the United States like, oh my God, look, China's ramping up the military. Look how evil they are. They about to launch war with us.
Please clap.